Hello everybody, hope y'all are doing good out there today. In this video, we're going to be talking about when knife design peaked. Ever since the first pocket knife was created, there has been a quest to make it better. There are a few things that come into play when this is considered: carryability, usability, and probably affordability. Those would probably be the big three. Now, in this video, I want to talk specifically about the usability. I may say a little bit about the carrying ability, but mainly the usability is what we're going to be thinking about in this video. How usable is the knife? That is, how many things can it do that it will be good at and still be able to be carried in your pocket? You know, there's always the possibility of having a whole arsenal of knives. You may have 20, 50 knives for different tasks. Big kitchen knives, little stuff, all this kind of stuff. And you may take that along with you, but you can't really take it with you. We're talking about an EDC knife, something you have in your pocket to have with you. Now, when it comes to carryability, it's got to be a pocketable size. But we're going to be thinking about blades in this video. When did knife design peak? The simplest form of a pocket knife might be something like this Sodbuster Jr., and it's still beautiful for its simplicity. You've got a folding handle and a blade, a handle that the blade will fold into. And it's simple as it can be. Open it, close it. It's a slip joint mechanism. This is still a good viable option today that many people will carry and enjoy and use a whole lot. Sodbuster Jr. is one of the most popular knives, and that's with good reason. But there's a few things about this knife that maybe make it not the peak of knife design. One is the blade design. This blade is great for a lot of tasks, but not every task. Namely, its lack of a sharp point. Because the point is not as sharp on this knife. If you were needing to do a draw cut on something, where you're putting the edge down and cutting something, it will do it. But if you're wanting to use the actual tip, you're going to have to tip this knife almost straight up and down to get that tip down. And that tip is just not as sharp as it could be. Other times we'll use tips like this to dig out a splinter or something like that where you need a real sharp tip. And this knife is just not quite as great at that as it could be. And the last thing I'll say about this blade shape is if you're cutting into something like this, this is a perfect blade shape because it has so much round right here from the tip down to the flat edge of the knife. And so if you're slicing vegetables or something on a cutting board, or if you're skinning where you're doing this kind of motion, that edge is perfect. So see, this blade is a great blade. It slices about the best of any blade you'll find. It's got a good simple design. It's got a strong tip with all the metal behind it. But the thing it suffers from is a lack of a tip. And there's no perfect pocket knife. But so people went around, how could we maybe make this knife a little bit better? Take a minute though to notice just how beautiful that patina is on this knife. This is a beautiful, beautiful looking knife. So this right here is a great option. But how could they make it just a little bit better, a little more usable? The solution didn't take long to come by. The solution was to use two blades instead of just one. This is a trapper for our example. Here we have what's known as a spey blade. This would take the part of a skinning blade because it does not have that super sharp tip. Has a nice round on it. It'll do good for, if you're skinning or if you're slicing like that. So here we have a spey blade represented. But because we want a tip, what are we going to do? Why, we put on another blade with a more pronounced tip. Namely, this is a clip point blade. And you can see it has a much more pronounced tip. It would be much easier to pierce through a plastic like a clamshell package, or to dig out a splinter, because you've got this sharp, pronounced point. And so this is what would be known as a jackknife. You've got two blades that open at one end. And so this is the next step in knife design. Instead of just having one blade with one shape that has a lot of advantages but a few downfalls, take two blades that each cover different tasks. So this one would be more of a sharp piercing blade. This one would cover more of the tasks like your Skinner blade would, like on this Sodbuster Jr. And so this right here is the next step in knife evolution, is to put two blades on, and the idea is to focus the blades on different tasks. The next big thing that come into play is the length of the blades. Sometimes a smaller blade is better than a larger blade. A lot of times if you're doing fine detail of some sort, and you've got a trapper-style knife, this is a mini trapper here, 3.5-inch handle. You reach your finger out all the way to the tip, to do some careful detail work. Sometimes, if you're whittling especially, you would like a shorter blade because you can be a little more precise with it. So then it come into idea, maybe instead of having two blades of the exact same size and the exact same length, and you'll notice just how similar these edges are to each other besides the tip, maybe we should make the blades a different size. And this is how we come by the classic design for a jackknife. Most jackknives are going to have some longer blade. Sometimes it's going to be a spear point blade. Sometimes it's going to be a clip point blade, like this one right here. But you've got a long blade here, that you could reach your finger out. It's big enough to slice through a muffin, a biscuit, or an apple. So the blade is long enough itself, and it has a nice point on it. But instead of having a spey blade, because most people aren't using their knives for skinning, they put a more utilitarian blade on it, like this one right here. And this is known as a pin blade. You'll notice the blade is a lot thinner, a lot pointier, and it is a lot shorter than the clip blade. What that will do is it will enable you to be able to do fine detail when you want it. When you're not needing to slice through something that's big, when you're needing to do fine detail, you can get this little blade. You can put your finger all the way to the end of it, like a depth gauge, if you're cutting into a box, and you can cut into that box as you slice without going too deep. Or if you want to do some little details, you can get right down in there and do it a lot easier. Plus, if you're working with a clamshell package, I'm sure all of y'all are aware of this one. If you're trying to do that with either one of these blades on this mini trapper, you're going to have to be more careful as you're trying to get down in there with that tip. It's much easier on a smaller knife, like this Barlow right here, to be able to put that tip in on this pin blade and to be able to cut. And so this is the most common form of a jackknife here. Now, there's many forms which a jackknife might take. The mini trapper would be considered a jackknife, though because it has the spey blade, it is more of what we would call a trapper knife, though officially it is a jackknife. We might have some like this medium jack. You got a clip point blade. You got an pin blade again. Look at that beautiful patina. And there is no end to good designs for jackknives because the blades are complementing each other in a still easy to carry package. Let's look at two more examples here. This knife is a one-arm razor from Case. The clip point has been removed, and it has this dip right here, I guess we'll call it. And this is to open it like on your belt or on your boot. This makes it a one-armed opening knife. But if you're actually using this knife and you're not needing to use it for that purpose, you don't have a sharp, pronounced tip. You'd have a hard time cutting into some things or digging out a splinter with this blade. So by making the knife jackknife, you get your pin blade here, and here you have a sharp, pronounced tip if you need it, and you've got a shorter blade for the same reasons that we talked about with this Barlow right here. And my favorite jackknife of all time, this is Peanut. Peanut is a small knife. It's like 2 3/4 inches closed. And you got a 2-inch cutting edge of a clip point blade that's nice and slim, and it's a good slicer. And then you've got your secondary pin blade, as you can see right here. And that pin blade again is that nice pointy tip. It's a little shorter, so it's a little stouter. It's got a little thicker blade stalk than the clip does. And so these two blades complement each other. And that's one of the things that makes one of these knives just absolutely great. And so that's why a jackknife is a good option. And so somebody might argue that a jackknife is the peak of knife invention. That maybe that's the best because you got two blades that complement each other. But then somebody will say, but the jackknife is a little bit too wide. Jackknives, because they got two blades, you're going to have two back springs and aligners and everything, and they can get a little thicker. If you're wanting a thinner knife, why, there's another solution. And the solution is what's known as a pen knife. A pen knife, unlike a jackknife, is going to have your main blade. Again, we're represented with a clip point blade, a larger blade that's going to be slicier. And then on the other end, you're going to have your pen blade, again, a shorter blade, that's going to be maybe a little bit stouter for getting into clamshell packages and such as that. The difference being, instead of being one on each end, they're both on opposite ends, and because of that, you can get one back spring or two smaller back springs depending on the model, and it makes the knife slimmer. Doesn't have a liner down the middle, and there's a higher chance the blades will rub, but this is another way to take two blades with you where each blade does a different task. Another example would be the canoe or the butter bean. This one right here has the same theory. You've got a longer blade, but now this right here is what you call a spear point blade, and so it doesn't have as pronounced of a tip. On the other side, on this little butter bean, we're going to have the pin blade, which has a little more of a pronounced tip, but not quite as much. And so in my opinion, this canoe or this butter bean wouldn't be quite as versatile as these other knives here that have a pin blade and a clip point blade. But nevertheless, it's still a great knife. But to me, this is still a pin blade, but the blades don't complement each other as well because they're almost the same thing, just in different sizes. So what if we decide to just start adding more blades to our knife? Maybe we'll add a whole bunch of blades and come up with something like this. This is a Congress here. Small coping blade. Slightly larger sheepsfoot blade. I guess you'd call that a drop point blade or a slightly modified sheepsfoot blade, and a little pin blade. Now when it comes to this design, you get lots of blades, but there's two things that I don't think makes this the best design in my opinion. These two blades are basically the same size, and on top of that, the tip is nearly the same sharpness. The tip is so low on this blade that it's almost like an sheepsfoot blade. They're not quite the same, but they're very close. Those blades almost are doing the same task. And when it comes to the other side here, you've got this pin blade and this coping blade. They're about the same size, though they do have a different shape. But to me, although this is a super neat knife, and it's really cool, you're getting some overlap in the uses of the blade. So you're getting a super wide, look how wide that knife is, super wide knife with little short blades, and you don't have a longer blade. Even if you have a big Congress, like a 5-inch Congress, it's still going to have shorter blades in it because they've got to have room to fit 4. So all this being said, we now arrive at what I think is the peak of knife invention, the peak of knife versatility. And that's this right here. This is what's known as a Stockman pattern. And you can go back and look at the Cattleman knife, and you can read about the different versions it's went through and its evolution over the years. But nevertheless, the Stockman knife. What is the Stockman knife today? Most Stockman knives are going to have 3 blades. And the blade styles in them can vary, but for the most part, their main blade is going to be what's known as a clip point blade, like this one right here. You're going to have a sharp tip, and it's going to be a long blade that is about as long as the handle, and it is going to be for slicing. So that's going to be your main blade on a Stockman knife. Then secondarily, you're going to have 2 other blades. Now these 2 other blades can vary, but the most common options is sheepsfoot blade, spey blade, and pin blade in any kind of configuration. Now the most common, what I have seen anyways the most, is going to be for the secondary blade to be this sheepsfoot blade right here. Now the first thing you're going to notice is that it's much, much shorter than the other blade was. Look how much shorter it is than the clip blade. So if you're needing to cut something like a biscuit, you got enough blade on that clip blade to do it. On the other hand, if you're needing to get in there and do some details, this blade is short enough that you can get in there. Plus, the fact that the tip is at the bottom means that whenever you're cutting into a box or something, you don't have to lift the knife up as high. You can leave it more like this and cut. So it's a better slicer for draw cuts. And so these blades, you got a super pronounced piercing tip. You've got a tip that's super low on the knife for draw cuts. You got a long blade to cut big things. You got a short blade to do more detail on it. And on top of all this, if all this wasn't enough, this blade here, when you look at it, this is going to be a slicer. If you're going to be cutting some vegetables or something like that, you're going to be using that blade because of the round on it. It's rounded enough, you can cut good with it. On the other hand, you'd have a very hard time doing that with this blade right here. Cutting vegetables would be pretty difficult. You could do it, but it wouldn't be as good as the other. But at the same time, this blade cutting into a clamshell package would be absolutely great. And so these two blades complement each other perfectly. And so then we get the idea. We have an pen knife design like this butter bean where we got a blade on each side, sharing a spring, or having two small springs, but usually sharing a spring. And we've got this jackknife style of knife where that we've got two knives on one end with two springs. So what happened if we was to combine these two styles? Why, you get a Stockman. How you do it is you take one blade, namely your big blade, make it as long as the knife handle, and put it on its own spring in the back here, as you can see. Then you take your other spring, like a jackknife, put a second blade, just like a jackknife, beside your clip blade, and then you put another blade at the end of it, like a penknife. So you combine a jackknife and a penknife, and you've got to lose that liner that goes down the center of a jackknife. So you're not going to have this brass liner that runs down the center. It'll be more like a penknife, where that it's just open in the center. But you combine these two designs, two back springs, two blades on one end, one blade on the other, like a penknife, and you get the classic Stockman. Now this particular one has what's known as an spey blade for the third blade, which is probably the most common, and that is the same blade that you can see represented here on this mini trapper. It's just shortened down, as you can see. If I can get that focus, it's just shortened down so it would fit in the handle good. Now, a lot of Stockmans will have a pen blade here, and a lot of people prefer the pen blade. That's good. If you like that, go with that one. But this one right here, why is a spey blade a good option? Well, one thing, it's thick all the way to the tip. If you're doing a hard use task, use this blade. If you don't want to dole out your other blades, use this blade. Also, if you're cutting and you don't want to pierce, that happens sometimes. Sometimes I'm cutting something and I'd say, oh, I don't want to poke all the way through. Use this blade. It's helpful to have a blade without a tip because you do not want to pierce stuff. Imagine you're cutting a zip tie off a waterbed. Hey, I don't know why there'd be a zip tie on a waterbed, but stuff like that happens. So sometimes it's helpful to have a blade without a pronounced tip and to have a thick, stout blade like this spey blade. The other thing to notice is notice the angle. Most Stockmans are going to have an angle like this, where it angles that blade down. That's extra good if you're like cutting rope and pulling it towards you, where you can see how that blade cants downward, so it fits the hand good and you're pulling it towards you. If you're cutting rope like that, it will pull the rope into it instead of sliding off of it. Where if we look at this sheepsfoot blade, it's straight out. So if you pull, it's not going to be as easy to cut. And so that right there is when I think the pocket knife reached its peak of design was with the Stockman. I think the Congress is too much, and you lose the long blade. I don't think that's ideal, and all the blades are very similar. I think that the penknife is a good design, and the penknife will be enough for most people. But with the penknife, you're not able to get as big of a blade as you might desire for the clip point unless you really make it wide and put two back springs. And if you do that, then you might as well just add another knife blade in there. And do we really need two knife blades the same size like in a trapper? Some people would say, yeah, well, that's good. I like the trapper also, good model. But if not, you get a Stockman and every blade will complement the other blade but not take its place. And it's still slim, easy to fit in the pocket. The only two reasons people don't like Stockmans a lot of times is they'll think that one of the blades is unnecessary, which might be true for your usage. They may not like that you have to bend the sheepsfoot blade or the second blade to make it fit into the handle, or they don't like blade rub. Because there's so many blades put in this little handle, sometimes these blades will rub together. And so I say all this to say that I think knife production reached its peak with the Stockman design. Y'all let me know down in the comments your opinions. Now we could go on to the multi-tool design and talk about Swiss Army knives and Leathermans. That's a different task. We're talking about pocket knives. Thanks for watching. Let me know your opinions. Y'all have a good day. Keep your knives sharp.